Imagine this. A student walks into the exam hall, heart pounding, palms sweaty. They open the paper, glance at the first question, and their mind goes completely blank. Hours of late-night study vanish in an instant. Or picture a confident executive standing on stage in front of hundreds of people. They've rehearsed their speech for weeks, but when the spotlight hits, every word they planned to say evaporates into thin air. Have you ever been in a moment like that? Where the thing you desperately needed to remember slipped through your fingers the second you reached for it? For most of us, forgetting feels like failure. We beat ourselves up for having a bad memory, when in truth, the human brain was never designed to store every scrap of information we encounter. It has its limits, and it has its rules. But here's the secret. If you understand those rules, you can bend them. If you learn how memory really works, you can train your brain to hold on to anything you choose. Whether it's names, facts, numbers, speeches, or even entire books. The question is it possible to remember everything? Science and history both tell us the answer is closer to yes than you might believe. In this video, we're going to uncover the exact principles and strategies used by memory champions, top performers, and everyday people who've unlocked the hidden potential of their minds. Get ready, because by the end, you may never look at your memory the same way again. So why do we forget? To answer that, let's step inside the incredible machine we carry in our heads. Our brain doesn't just have one kind of memory. It has short-term memory, the scratch pad where we jot down fleeting details like a phone number someone just recited. And it has long-term memory, the vault where life's lessons, skills, and stories are stored. The problem is that most information never makes it from the scratch pad into the vault. Unless we give the brain a reason to keep something, it quietly tosses it away. More than a century ago, a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered something fascinating, the forgetting curve. He found that if you don't review new information, you can lose up to 70% of it within 24 hours. It's not that your brain is broken, it's that forgetting is the brain's way of decluttering. Imagine if you remembered every advertisement you've ever seen or every meaningless detail from your morning commute. You'd be drowning in noise. Forgetting is survival. But sometimes, what slips away isn't just noise. It's the name of a new client you just met. It's the key concept on an exam. It's your lines on stage after weeks of rehearsals. Why does this happen? Stress is one culprit. When adrenaline spikes, your brain shifts into fight or flight mode, and memory access suffers. Another culprit is overload. We live in an era of constant notifications, endless to-do lists, and information pouring in from every direction. Our attention gets fractured, and without focus, memories don't stick. Finally, there's the simple fact that most of us were never taught how to store information effectively. We try to brute force facts into our heads without giving them a structure or a story, so they evaporate. Think about a doctor walking through a busy hospital. They have to recall hundreds of patient names, conditions, and medications. Or imagine an actor rehearsing an entire Shakespeare play, with thousands of words to memorize. These people don't have superhuman brains. What they do have are systems, strategies that work with the brain's natural wiring instead of against it. That's the good news. Once you understand why you forget, you can also learn how to remember. And that's where the real transformation begins. If forgetting is the brain's default mode, then remembering is an art, and every art has its principles. Before you can master any technique, you need to understand the golden rules that memory champions rely on. Whether they're recalling hundreds of names or memorizing entire decks of cards in minutes. These aren't tricks. They're the laws of how the brain prefers to store information. The first is association. Your brain is not a filing cabinet. It doesn't store information in neat alphabetical folders. Instead, it thrives on connections. When you tie a new idea to something familiar, you give your mind a hook to hang it on. That's why you might forget a random number but instantly recall your childhood phone number. The brain latches onto meaning and relationships. Association is like weaving new threads into an old tapestry. You remember because the pattern makes sense. The second principle is spaced repetition. If you try to cram everything the night before an exam, you're fighting your biology. The forgetting curve shows us that knowledge fades rapidly unless it's revisited at the right intervals. Reviewing something just as you're about to forget it is the secret to locking it into long-term memory. Think of it like training a muscle. You don't get stronger by lifting once, but by returning again and again at the right pace. Then comes emotion. We remember moments that made us laugh, cry, or feel awe, even years later, while we forget what we had for lunch last Tuesday. Why? Because the brain tags emotional experiences as important, worth saving. If you can connect learning to an emotion, surprise, curiosity, excitement, you dramatically increase the odds of keeping it. And finally, the brain craves vivid images. We don't think in abstract words, we think in pictures. Say, dog, and most people instantly see a furry animal in their mind. That's why turning concepts into colorful, exaggerated, even bizarre mental images is so powerful. A shopping list becomes unforgettable when you imagine a giant loaf of bread crashing through your window, or a carton of milk exploding like fireworks in your kitchen. These golden principles aren't theoretical, they're proven in action. Consider a world memory champion asked to recall 1,000 random digits in order. He doesn't see numbers on a page. Instead, he transforms them into wild, emotional, and linked images, a superhero juggling planets, a dragon perched on a skyscraper, a clown riding a unicycle through flames. To an outsider it seems like magic. In reality, it's simply using the brain the way it was designed to be used. Master these principles and suddenly memory is no longer a mystery. It's a skill. And the more you practice, the more limitless it becomes. Now that you know the golden principles, let's bring them to life with techniques that can make your memory feel limitless. These are not just theories on paper. They are the exact tools used by memory champions, actors, doctors, and everyday people who've trained their brains to do the extraordinary. The first and most famous is the memory palace. Imagine taking a simple grocery list, milk, apples, bread, eggs, and instead of trying to repeat the words over and over, you walk through your house in your mind. You open the front door and a river of milk pours across the floor. In the living room, a giant apple the size of a car crashes through the ceiling. In the kitchen, a loaf of bread is sitting proudly on the stove wearing a crown. And on your bed, a mountain of eggs is wobbling dangerously, about to topple. Ridiculous? Absolutely. But unforgettable. That's the point. Your brain locks onto bizarre, exaggerated imagery, and suddenly, what was once random becomes impossible to forget. This is how some memory masters can walk into an auditorium, meet 100 strangers, and recall every single name. They don't have supernatural brains. They build a mental palace, placing each name in a familiar space, attaching it to a wild, sticky image. A man named Mr. Baker becomes a baker throwing flour in the hallway of their imaginary palace. A woman named Rose transforms into a giant red rose blooming in the kitchen sink. It's playful, strange, and astonishingly effective. Another powerful technique is chunking. Our brains aren't wired to remember long strings of random data, but they excel when information is grouped. Think about phone numbers. 10 digits can feel impossible to memorize if you treat them as a string. 4,159,237,861. But when broken into chunks, 415, 923, 7,861, it suddenly feels natural. You've probably used this technique your whole life without realizing it. The same applies to credit cards, addresses, even birthdays. By grouping information into meaningful clusters, you reduce the load on your short-term memory and give your brain a fighting chance to store it long-term. Visualization is another secret weapon. Words on a page are flat, but the mind thrives on color, movement, and absurdity. If you need to memorize the words, apple, dog, airplane, don't just repeat them in your head. Instead, imagine a giant dog flying an airplane while munching on a bright red apple. The more ridiculous the image, the more your brain loves it. That's because unusual, emotional, and exaggerated visuals stand out against the endless gray background of ordinary information. A dull fact becomes unforgettable when you paint it with imagination. Then there are mnemonics and acronyms, classic tools, but still powerful. If you studied science in school, you may remember Roygbiv for the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Doctors memorize long lists of bones, nerves, or symptoms using silly rhymes and phrases. Pilots use acronyms to recall complex procedures under stress. These shortcuts work because they compress heavy information into light, repeatable patterns. They act as mental handles you can grab when pressure is high. But perhaps the most underestimated technique of all is storytelling. Human beings have remembered stories long before we ever wrote things down. Our ancestors passed knowledge from generation to generation by weaving facts into tales. When you take dry information and thread it into a narrative, the memory becomes 10 times stronger. Instead of trying to memorize a list of 10 historical events, create a journey where each event is a character in a story. The Boston Tea Party becomes a group of rebellious friends at a wild dinner. The signing of the Declaration of Independence becomes a dramatic handshake, and so on. By the time you're done, you've built a narrative your brain can walk through like a movie. When you combine these techniques, the results are astonishing. A student struggling to memorize hundreds of vocabulary words can turn them into a vivid story and recall them with ease. An actor faced with pages of script can break lines into chunks, attach emotional images, and walk through a memory palace until the performance feels effortless. A doctor who once struggled to keep names straight suddenly remembers every patient, because each name has been transformed into an unforgettable character in their mental landscape. What makes these techniques so powerful isn't that they're complicated, it's that they align perfectly with how the human brain was designed to work. Memory isn't about brute force. It's about creativity, playfulness, and structure. Once you learn to turn abstract into concrete, boring into emotional, random into connected, you unlock the ability to remember not just more, but almost everything you want. And here's the best part. These techniques are not reserved for the gifted few. They're available to anyone willing to practice. You don't need to be a genius. You need to be curious, consistent, and maybe a little silly in your imagination. The moment you embrace that, you stop saying, "I have a bad memory," and start saying, "I know exactly how to remember this." So far, we've explored the principles and techniques of memory. But what good is knowledge if it doesn't translate into everyday life? The real power of memory training is not in memorizing random numbers or impressing people with card tricks. It's in making your daily world sharper, more efficient, and even more meaningful. Let's start with education. Imagine a high school student preparing for a history exam. Instead of trying to cram endless dates and events, she builds a memory palace. As she walks through her childhood home in her mind, the kitchen sink becomes July 4, 1776, overflowing with fireworks and parchment paper. The living room couch turns into 1865, with Abraham Lincoln tipping his hat while sitting there. Suddenly, history isn't a jumble of numbers. It's a vivid journey through her house. She not only passes her exam but actually enjoys the process. In professional life, memory can be the secret weapon that sets you apart. Picture a business executive walking into a networking event with 100 people in the room. Most of us struggle to remember 2 or 3 names. But this executive has trained herself to use association and visualization. She meets a man named Jack Baker. Instantly, she imagines him pulling loaves of bread out of his jacket pocket. The image is ridiculous, unforgettable. Later, when she greets him again with, "Jack, so good to see you," his eyes light up. People remember those who remember them. In fact, one sales leader swore that learning to recall clients' names and details about their families doubled his revenue in a single year. Memory, in this sense, isn't just personal, it's profitable. And in everyday life, memory brings ease where there was once frustration. No more wandering around the supermarket staring blankly at your phone. Instead, you can walk the aisles guided by your own memory palace. Apples crashing through your front door, milk exploding in your hallway, coffee beans scattered on your bed, shopping lists, to-do lists, even that random password you keep forgetting. They all become part of a story your brain loves to tell itself. This is the beauty of memory mastery. It doesn't just make you smarter in a classroom or sharper in business. It frees your mind from constant stress and forgetfulness, giving you confidence in every setting. Memory turns ordinary moments into opportunities to connect, to succeed, and to live with clarity. Memory isn't just about techniques, it's also about lifestyle. You can build the most elaborate memory palace in the world, but if your brain is tired, stressed, and malnourished, it's like trying to paint on a cracked canvas. The habits you live by shape the strength of your memory more than you might realize. The first habit is sleep. Neuroscientists have found that while we sleep, our brains are hard at work, replaying the day's events and transferring them from short-term storage into long-term memory. It's like a librarian quietly shelving books in the middle of the night. Cut your sleep short, and the books pile up in chaos. One college student learned this the hard way. She pulled all-nighters to study for exams, only to blank out during the test. The moment she prioritized 8 hours of rest, her recall improved more than any last-minute cram session ever could. Nutrition is another key. Your brain is only 2% of your body weight, yet it consumes about 20% of your energy. Feed it junk, and it struggles. But give it brain-boosting foods, salmon rich in omega-3s, walnuts packed with healthy fats, blueberries loaded with antioxidants, and you'll notice sharper focus and longer-lasting clarity. Think of it as premium fuel for a high-performance engine. Exercise, too, is not just about the body. Every time you raise your heart rate, you pump fresh oxygen and nutrients to the brain, stimulating growth and strengthening neural connections. People who walk, swim, or cycle regularly often find their memory sharper, not because they memorized more, but because their brain itself is healthier. Then there's mindfulness. In our distracted world, multitasking feels normal, but it's a memory killer. If you're checking your phone while someone introduces themselves, don't be surprised if their name vanishes seconds later. Training your focus through meditation or simply giving full attention to one task at a time can dramatically increase what you retain. Finally, create an environment that supports memory. A cluttered desk or noisy background forces your brain to filter distractions before it can store anything meaningful. But a calm, organized space tells your mind, "This matters." Remember it. Build these habits and memory stops being a constant struggle. It becomes a natural, daily strength, because your brain is no longer fighting against you, but working with you. So now you know the truth. We don't really have bad memory. What we often have is an untrained memory, a mind that hasn't been shown how to use the tools it already carries within. Imagine how different your life could be if forgetting wasn't your default, but remembering was. Exams wouldn't feel terrifying, speeches wouldn't slip away on stage, and meeting new people would be exciting instead of awkward. The techniques we've explored, association, spaced repetition, memory palaces, chunking, visualization, mnemonics, storytelling, aren't magic tricks. They're ways of unlocking the brain's natural ability to hold on to what matters. When you add the right habits, sleep, nutrition, exercise, focus, you turn your memory into a reliable ally, not a stumbling block. Now it's your turn. I want you to test this for yourself. Right after watching, try building your very first memory palace. Picture a familiar place, your bedroom, your kitchen, your walk to work, and assign each location a specific item from a shopping list of 10 things. See if you can recall them all without looking. You'll be amazed how quickly your mind adapts when you give it structure and creativity. And if this video sparked something in you, take the challenge further. Practice, experiment, and notice how your daily life transforms. If you found value here, don't forget to like, share your results in the comments, and subscribe for more. Remember this. If you can train your memory, you can train your life. To remember everything is not just about storing facts, it's about living fully awake.